This is still the conversation. Nick Mangwana, the permanent secretary of the Ministry of Information, has criticized the United States Embassy for its perceived condescension. Now, Mangwana urged the diplomatic mission to concentrate on enhancing bilateral relations instead of involving itself in the internal affairs of the country. His comments came in response to a recent statement from the U.S. Embassy expressing apprehension about the pretrial detention and prolonged delays faced by political prisoners. And of course, joining me to discuss this is Sydicks Muradzikwa, political analyst from Harare, Zimbabwe, and also Prosper Chitambara, development economist, also from Harare, Zimbabwe. Thank you so much for your time, gentlemen.
Thank you.
All right, now, can you I would like to start with you, Sydicks. Just give us an idea of what the situation is like with pretrial detention and prolonged delays faced by political prisoners, and also the overall, what I call it, a state of democracy in Zimbabwe.
Well, in terms of what is currently obtaining in our country in terms of the pretrial incarceration, pretrial detention, I think there are a lot of concerns which are being raised by various circles in our society, which are asking a lot of questions on the kind of governance which has been adopted by the new dispensation under the leader, the President Emmerson Mnangagwa. So there is a lot of a worrisome development in terms of what is actually obtaining in terms of the separation of powers, in terms of the state, the judiciary, and the executive. So a lot of meddling and interference is actually being reported in terms of the president trying to influence what the courts can say and what the courts cannot say. So that is also a development which is currently being obtaining in Zimbabwe, which is affecting the kind of democracy ever since his assumption to power since November 2017 up to this day. So in terms of the pre-trial incarceration of particularly one job scholar, a lot of questions have been raised by civil society organizations in trying to ensure that justice prevails. So this is the kind of situation that every concerned citizen wants to see job seeker being released, or a lot of changes in terms of what is actually hindering his trial in our country.
Okay, and now on a scale of 1 to 10, of course, how would you rate democracy in Zimbabwe, 10 being the highest?
Sorry, come again?
On a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate the progress of democracy in Zimbabwe, 10 being the highest?
In terms of rating or the gradation of democracy, like what you are alluding to in terms of a Likert scale, I would say democracy in Zimbabwe since November 2017 up until now is actually gone to the negative. So I would say it is actually rescinded back, maybe -10, if I may say, because the new government is trying to shatter all the democratic gains that have been enjoyed by the citizens of Zimbabwe. So in terms of the gradation, I think we have had a democratic backsliding in terms of our governance architecture and governance system in Zimbabwe.
All right, let me go to you, Chitambara. I mean, what's your reaction to, of course, I mean, political prisoner situation in the country, and also the state of democracy in Zimbabwe? Will you, of course, want to agree to some extent with, of course, I mean, our lead speaker?
The best person really to comment on politics. I'm more a development economist, but of course, we want a stable political environment where there's justice, where there is the rule of law, but I think I'm not qualified to speak a lot to
Okay,
issues of politics.
let's put it within the economic context, right? In terms of the standard of living of Zimbabweans compared to what it used to be and right now, would you say there's improvement? Are the policies put in place actually pushing Zimbabweans further into prosperity or obscurity?
No, I think there's still a lot of structural macroeconomic challenges that the government has to deal with. We've just been grappling with chronic high inflation for a very, very long time. And of course, that has eroded people's incomes and has thrown a lot of people into poverty. Where we have seen the informalization of the economy, where almost about 90% of total employment is now informal. Most of our people actually taking out a living in the informal economy. So the informal economy, as you know, is characterized by low levels of productivity, low levels of income, and high levels of poverty. We are having challenges with respect to electricity. Yes, the government is trying to enhance the capacity of our energy generating capacity, but there are still challenges, and that affects businesses. That increases the cost of doing business. We have seen government, of course, investing in road construction, especially the major highways. But I think the scale of what needs to be done is very, very huge in terms of the financing requirement. And of course, the capacity of government alone to be able to address that is limited. In terms of the doing business environment, I think it's still a bit challenging. Investment inflows have not been very good when you look at the numbers, especially when you compare with countries in the region, like South Africa, Mozambique, and even Zambia. So I think there is a lot that we need to address economically for our economy to begin to grow more sustainably and more inclusively, creating employment opportunities, and also having a greater impact on the high levels of poverty.
All right, now
and ensuring, of course, that there is sustained macroeconomic stability, because ultimately no economy can actually grow without a very stable macroeconomic environment. Low and stable inflation becomes critical.
All right, now let me go back to Sydicks. Now, let's talk about the U.S. apprehension and, of course, the reason for the reaction of the minister right there. Is there any weight to some of the allegations that the U.S. expressed in terms of, the political state and also atmosphere in the country as regards the country's local politics?
It depends. The question depends on the quarter of the society where you're coming from. If you are a Zimbabwean, a Democrat, yes, probably you may agree with the raised issues, the issues that has been raised by the U.S. Embassy. But if you are coming from a government perspective, like Honorable Minister Nick Mangwana has alluded to, of course, you would defend the state position to say we need to have our sovereignty respected. So I think to a certain degree, what Nick Mangwana has alluded to, it holds water in terms of the diplomatic relations. Zimbabwe also is a country which has its own sovereignty, which allow itself to solve its domestic affairs. So I think in terms of the diplomatic responses, Nick Mangwana actually is trying to waive a support or try to deter the US in terms of what it can do and what it cannot do. So there is a certain degree where I would say I would agree with Nick Mangwana to say we have our own problems which are affecting our country, but we should be able to solve our issues internally. But when I come to our own domestic affairs as a Zimbabwean, I think the government is really fell short in terms of delivering the expected constitutionalism, the expected democracy that we all want. So to a certain degree, one would say the US is right, because Zimbabwe is also a signatory of a signatory to international law, which the US and other countries within the family of nations superintend over.
Now, let's also, of course, still dwelling on that. Let's look at some of the things of course, our minister said. He actually urged that the diplomatic mission should concentrate on enhancing bilateral relations instead of involving itself in the internal affairs of the country. Now, my question to you is this. Number one, how will this impact the country's bilateral relations with the US? I'm still staying with you, Sydicks. And to what extent will you say that, or can you say that Zimbabwe depends on the US when it comes to running the country? From politics, I would leave the aspect of economy, of course, for Chitambara.
In terms of Zimbabwe as a country depending on US, I think in the Committee of Nations, all nation states depend on each other. That is what international relations, the dictates of international relations gives us. So to say Zimbabwe actually depends on what the US does or what it doesn't do, I think it's kind of a folly. But in terms of whether, on the question whether the US is within the right frame to reprimand Zimbabwe on what is actually happening or what is actually obtaining within its internal or domestic sphere, I think it actually holds water. The US have also the jurisdiction, just like any other country, like Zambia, like South Africa, like Namibia, like Britain, and the like. So they are also duty bound to ensure that issues to do with democracy, rule of law, justice, constitutionalism are adhered to.
All right, let me go to you, Chitambara. Let's look at the economic impact. This particular, will I call it impasse right now, diplomatic impasse happening will have on Zimbabwe and Zimbabweans. How deep will you say the economic relations between Zimbabwe and the US really is?
Well, I think relations obviously have been strained because of a number of factors, including, of course, the sanctions that the US government has actually imposed on the country. So obviously that has affected trade in a number of ways. The premium, obviously, on doing business in Zimbabwe is increased. Of course, it's not just because of sanctions, it's also because of our own internal factors. So there are a number of factors, but of course, what has happened in terms of our relations with the US is obviously exacerbated the extent of our economic challenges. So it actually makes it even more difficult for Zimbabwe to trade, and not just with the US, but even with most Western countries. So I would say relations, even though we continue to trade, but I think the onus is on both sets of politicians from the Zimbabwean side and the US side, probably to re-engage, to enter into some well-meaning re-engagement aimed at normalizing the relations. Because I think it's not in the best interest of, especially of Zimbabwe, of course, being a small economy, we would need to trade freely, to do business freely with the US. So I think the onus is really on us to come up with measures and reforms that can actually normalize our relations. Because we need everyone, we need the West, we need the East. I think we must be open to doing business with anyone. But of course, for us to benefit from that, we need to address our own internal challenges, whether it's economic challenges, to make sure that our economy is more competitive, and even our political challenges again, to make sure that there's political stability there's political tolerance, and there's sustainability, overall sustainability and competitiveness within the Zimbabwean economy and body politic.
All right. I mean, we've of course just pressed with time, but before I allow you go, gentlemen, just in 30 seconds, what do you actually think, starting with you, Chitambara, the government needs to do immediately or promptly in terms of the economy right now to sort of, will I say, maybe boost the confidence of the international community in Zimbabwe?
So in terms of the economy, yes, number one, the issue of fiscal discipline. That's been a major challenge over the past. Controlling public spending, especially recurrent public spending. We also need to ensure there's monetary discipline, controlling the levels of money supply growth within the economy. Because our biggest economic challenges have been that of fiscal ill discipline and also monetary ill discipline. So if we're able to ensure there's discipline on both the fiscal and the monetary front, then of course we also need to expedite the implementation of institutional reforms, especially around parastatals, because the government has been losing a lot of money through loss-making and inefficient parastatals. So institutional reforms are also critical in terms of ensuring there's greater levels of confidence and the country is able to achieve macroeconomic sustainability going forward.
All right.
So those three: fiscal, monetary, and then institutional reforms.
All right, I'd like to go to you, Sydicks. What's your take? What should the government immediately do to, of course, boost, will I call it, political confidence in Zimbabwe as a country from the international community in 30 seconds?
Zimbabwe should reduce the level of state antagonism and the rising of predatory politics of indifference. That should also be done quickly by the regime in Harare, by the administration in Harare, to say we should respect issues to do with democracy, change our the tolerance in terms of our governance institutions, our governance systems, so that we also become a part and parcel of the international family of nations without any problem or hindrance. So we should deal with the predatory politics of indifference.
All right, Sydicks, thank you so much. We're pressed with time, we need to go. But gentlemen, thank you for your time. Sydicks Muradzikwa, political analyst from Harare, Zimbabwe, and Prosper Chitambara, development economist, also from Harare, Zimbabwe. Thank you so much once again, gentlemen, for your time.
Thank you so much, pleasure.
And that's a wrap on the show today. My name is Dapo Adegboye. Join me, of course, on the same station, News Central. Bye for now.